If years ago someone had told me I'd be sitting here, writing this post and spilling out my life like it's the plot of some cheap novel, I would have laughed at them. I was never the type to get wrapped up in drama or messy situations. I thought I had everything under control. But life has a funny way of flipping things upside down when you least expect it. Let me backtrack a bit. I'm not the kind of person to throw pity parties, but what I'm about to share is my truth, no sugarcoating, no avoiding the uncomfortable details. You all deserve the full picture. Maybe it'll help someone, maybe it won't, but it's helping me get my mind straight, so here goes. I grew up in your typical small-town family. My dad worked long hours and my mum was always around, keeping things together. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. My parents were the kind who stuck it out no matter what. Sure, they argued, but divorce? That wasn't even in their vocabulary. So, I grew up thinking marriage was forever. Once you signed up, you stayed loyal, worked through your problems, and didn't quit when things got tough. I guess that's where I got my skewed sense of commitment. But when you grow up in a family like that, you start to build these unrealistic expectations. I thought I could fix anything, that if I just tried hard enough, any relationship could be saved. Even my first marriage, I thought I could fix that too. Spoiler alert, I couldn't. My first wife and I were too young, way too young. We rushed into everything like a couple of fools' marriage, buying a house, even planning for kids. But when reality hit financial struggles and her realizing we weren't a good match, it all fell apart. That was my first real taste of betrayal. She left me for someone else, someone who seemed more exciting, I guess, and I was left cleaning up the mess. But I came out of it with this rock-solid determination that next time, things would be different. I wouldn't fail again. And then I met her. Let's call her Jessica. We met at a party of all places. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious at first. I was still nursing my wounds from the divorce, and she was this whirlwind of energy that just drew me in. She had a way of making you feel like you were the only one in the room. The kind of woman who made you forget all the bad things that had happened before. We took it slow. Our first date wasn't anything fancy, just dinner at a little Italian spot I liked. But it was the conversation that hooked me. She was sharp, witty, and could hold her own. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the person I can build a life with. We both had baggage, sure, but it felt like we could handle anything together. It wasn't always smooth sailing. We had our tough times like any couple. There was a period where I lost my job, and we had to get by on her income alone, but we made it work. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. The thing about hindsight is you look back and realize how blind you were to the warning signs. But before I get into that, there's someone else I need to mention, my best friend, Rob. Rob and I went way back. We'd known each other since high school when we thought we could conquer the world. He wasn't just a friend, he was like a brother. We did everything together, sports, road trips, even a few wild nights I'd rather not talk about. When I went through my first divorce, Rob was the one who helped me through the worst of it. I trusted him with everything. He was the first person I introduced Jessica to. The three of us even went on a few trips together, just fun, no drama. I never once thought there could be any tension between them. But now, looking back, I wonder if I missed something. Anyway, I thought I had it all figured out. We settled into a routine planning for the future, talking about kids, vacations, buying a bigger house, the kind of stuff you think about when you're building a life with someone. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. After all the crap I'd been through, I finally felt like I'd made it a stable home. A woman I loved, and a best friend who was practically family. But family life can blind you. You get so wrapped up in the day-to-day that you miss the cracks forming beneath the surface. We'd spend Sundays binge-watching shows, planning our next vacation, and talking about how many kids we wanted. I was naive enough to think that stability meant everything was fine. But stability is a joke when the ground beneath you is already shifting. You're probably wondering when it all started to go wrong. The thing is, at first it doesn't seem like anything's wrong. You don't see the betrayal coming because you don't want to. I certainly didn't. And as for Rob, well, we were close enough that if something was off, I figured he'd tell me. He always had my back, just like I had his. I never once thought my best friend and my wife would, but I'm getting ahead of myself. There were little things, tiny details that in hindsight were screaming red flags, but at the time I was too busy playing house to notice. For now, just know these things weren't as perfect as they seemed. You know how people say you can feel it when something's wrong? Like an instinct kicks in, and even if everything seems fine, you get that nagging feeling that something's off. That's what happened to me. The worst part was, it started slow, creeping up on me until I couldn't ignore it anymore. At first, it wasn't anything big, just small things, little oddities that would have seemed normal if they hadn't started stacking up. Jessica, she began acting strange. I remember the first time I noticed something was off. She was always on her phone. Before this, we were the kind of couple who shared everything: texts, jokes, memes. But that changed. She became secretive, tilting her phone away when I walked by or locking it when I sat down next to her. Maybe it sounds paranoid, but after years with someone, you notice when they start guarding their phone like it holds nuclear launch codes. Then came the late nights. She worked in marketing, so late nights weren't unusual, but they became more frequent. She'd come home smelling like perfume I didn't recognize, her hair and makeup done in ways she hadn't bothered with for years. I'd ask her about her day, try to make conversation, but she was always too tired to talk. She'd brush me off with a faint smile and head to bed, leaving me alone in the living room with a growing knot in my stomach. I recall the night I finally lost my patience. She came home at some ridiculous hour, and I was sitting there in the dark, waiting for her like some kind of cliché. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She rolled her eyes as if I was making a big deal out of nothing. "I told you I had a late meeting," she said, kicking off her shoes and heading toward the bathroom. But this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. "A meeting that goes until midnight?" "Come on, Jessica, what's really happening?" I pressed, but she didn't even turn around. "Work is stressful right now. You know how it is. Can we not do this tonight?" She replied, using the same excuse she'd been giving me for everything. Maybe work was stressful, maybe I was overthinking things, but something about her tone, the way she wouldn't even look at me, didn't sit right. Then there was Rob. He'd been my best friend for years, and we'd been through it all together, but suddenly he started pulling away. No more fishing trips on the weekends, no more beers after work. He always had some excuse. Busy with work, family obligations, you name it. But the worst part, when we did manage to hang out, he seemed off, nervous, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. And it wasn't just me noticing. Our other friends started making comments too, asking what was up with Rob, why he was acting so strange. One night, after a few beers, one of the guys said, "What's up with Rob lately?" "He's been acting weird." I laughed it off at the time, shrugging. Yeah, probably just work, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Was he hiding something from me? For a while, I convinced myself it was all in my head, that I was just being paranoid and overanalyzing things. But the signs became harder to dismiss as time passed. Jessica started changing the password on her phone, and while I know couples don't have to share everything, she'd never done that before. We used to trust each other completely, but now it felt like I wasn't even part of her life anymore. I tried to talk to her, I really did. One night after dinner, I sat her down and said, "Look, I know you've got a lot going on at work, but you've been distant lately. I just want to make sure everything's okay." She didn't even pause to think. "I'm fine. It's just stress. You don't need to worry," she said. But I wasn't fine. I felt like I was drowning in doubt, an outsider in my own marriage. Every time I tried to get her to open up, she'd just repeat the same lines: "It's work. I'm tired. You're overthinking it." It wasn't just the words, it was how she said them. There was a flatness in her tone, like she was reading from a script. And yeah, I started checking her phone. I'm not proud of it, but what else was I supposed to do? I had to know if I was imagining things or if something was really going on. But I never found anything, no suspicious messages, no incriminating photos, just the usual work emails and boring group chats. Still, the more I looked, the more convinced I became that I was missing something. Then, one night, she came home from another so-called late meeting, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Are you cheating on me?" I asked her straight out. She froze, just for a split second, long enough for me to notice. Then, she turned, giving me this exasperated look, and said seriously, "After everything we've been through, you're going to accuse me of that?" Her words cut deep, but the way she said it, it was too smooth, too practiced. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her so badly. But deep down, I knew she was lying. And Rob? He was lying too. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing my best friend. But instead of confronting them, I did what anyone in my position would do. I kept quiet. I watched. I waited. I tried to gather the truth without letting on that I knew something was wrong. Every time Jessica went out, every time Rob made another excuse, I filed it away in my mind, building an invisible wall between us. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted to be ready. Deep down, I didn't want to believe it. I clung to the hope that maybe it was all just in my head. But when the signs keep hitting you over and over, there's only so much you can ignore. It was a family dinner that finally pushed me over the edge. Jessica had always been big on family, her parents, my parents, even the cousins. We'd had this dinner planned for weeks. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday get-together, nothing elaborate. But that afternoon, she suddenly had a work emergency, one so urgent that she had to cancel the entire evening. No real explanation, just a vague, "I've got to go, something came up at work." That was it. The final straw. I called Rob, thinking we could at least grab a beer and blow off some steam. But he didn't answer, not once. I texted him, left a voicemail, even checked his social media, nothing but silence. That's when I knew something was definitely wrong. The next morning I made the call. I still remember how much my hands shook as I dialed the number for the private investigator. It felt like I was crossing a line I'd never be able to come back from. But at that point, I had to know. I had to put an end to the uncertainty. The private investigator's name was Doug, and he seemed like an average guy, nothing flashy, which was exactly what I needed. We met at a quiet coffee shop on the other side of town, where no one would recognize me. I laid it all out for him, my suspicions, the strange behavior, the endless excuses. Doug listened without judgment, calmly taking notes like this was just another routine case for him. I remember asking him, "How long does this usually take?" Doug paused, pen still in hand, and said, "It depends. Some cases are solved in a few days, others can take weeks. But trust me, if something's happening, we'll uncover it." That it was what I clung to. I kept telling myself it could still be in my head. Maybe Jessica really was just stressed. Maybe Rob really was busy. But deep down, I knew better. It didn't take long. Just 3 days later, Doug called me. His voice was calm, like he'd delivered bad news 100 times before. "I think you'll want to see this," he said. We met at the same coffee shop, and Doug slid a manila envelope across the table. I stared at it for a moment, my stomach churning. I wasn't ready to open it, but I knew I had to. Inside were crystal clear photos of Jessica and Rob together. Not just together, but together. Holding hands at a restaurant, walking into a hotel. She was laughing, leaning into him the way she used to with me. I felt physically sick. It wasn't just the photos either. Doug had gathered everything, text messages between them, screenshots of their conversations, even a video clip from the hotel's security camera showing them walking arm in arm before disappearing behind a door. I couldn't breathe. Even with the proof staring me in the face, I didn't want to believe it. But there it was, Jessica, the woman I'd built my life with, and Rob, the friend I'd trusted like a brother, both betraying me in the worst way possible. I sat there in silence for what felt like hours, just staring at the evidence. Doug didn't say much, giving me space. Finally, I managed to ask how long. He shrugged. "Best I can tell, a few months, maybe longer." Months. They'd been sneaking around behind my back for months. I wanted to break something, scream, drive to wherever they were, and confront them on the spot. But I didn't. Instead, I thanked Doug, shoved the envelope into my bag, and left the coffee shop in a daze. On the drive home, the anger began to bubble up inside me. It wasn't just about Jessica, though what she had done hurt deeply. It was Rob, my best friend, my brother. The guy I trusted more than anyone, and he had done this to me. He'd stabbed me in the back and thought I'd never find out. No, I wasn't going to let them get away with it, neither of them. That's when the plan started to form in my mind. I wasn't going to confront them in some emotional outburst. No, I would be smarter than that. I was going to hit them where it hurt the most. For Jessica, it was our marriage. For Rob, it was his career. Rob worked at a high-profile company, the kind where image was everything. He constantly bragged about his spotless reputation and how he was in line for a promotion, how he was the golden boy. That's where I would strike him, right in his career. The first step was gathering more evidence. I already had plenty from Doug, but I needed more, something that would leave no doubt. I had Doug-tailed them for another week, collecting as much dirt as he could. It wasn't difficult. Jessica and Rob were careless, assuming they'd never get caught. More dinners, more hotels, even a weekend getaway. They didn't bother hiding it. Once I had everything, I began laying the groundwork. Rob's company had strict policies about personal behavior, especially when it came to affairs that could damage their reputation. I knew if I played this right, I could ruin his career with just a few strategically placed pieces of evidence. I drafted an anonymous email to his HR department, attaching the most damning photos, screenshots of their messages, and a note explaining how Rob's affair could harm the company's image. I made sure to mention that he was up for a promotion, just to twist the knife a little more. I didn't send it right away, though. I wanted to watch them squirm. Every time Jessica came home late or cancelled plans, I smiled to myself, knowing what was about to unfold. She had no clue what was brewing under the surface. And Rob? He hadn't called me in weeks. I figured he was too busy with my wife to check in on his best friend. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I sent the email. I didn't feel guilty, not one bit. They deserved everything that was coming their way. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Revenge isn't something you rush. If you want to do it right, you have to be patient, cold, and calculating. I wasn't going to let my emotions get the better of me, not after what Jessica and Rob had done. No, this had to be flawless, and it had to hit them where it would hurt the most. After sending that email to Rob's HR department, I didn't just sit back and wait. I kept collecting more evidence, making sure every move I made was airtight. Doug continued to follow them, and every new piece of dirt felt like another nail in their coffin. I knew where they went. What they did it was, as if they didn't care if they got caught. They were that arrogant. The more I watched, the clearer it became. Rob wasn't just meeting Jessica at hotels anymore, they were getting bolder, acting like a regular couple in public. I tracked their movements, studying their patterns. I knew when they had lunch together, where they went for drinks after work, and even when they slipped away for weekend business trips, but the real jackpot was social media. They thought they were clever, posting vague pictures of sunsets, dinners, and hotel rooms, but anyone paying attention could connect the dots. Rob would post a picture from a work event, holding a glass of wine, and an hour later Jessica would post from the same location. They might as well have hung a neon sign saying, "We're having an affair, I saved everything, screenshots, timestamps, comments, it was all part of the plan." Rob's carefully constructed image as the perfect family man was about to crumble, and I would be the one holding the wrecking ball. Rob wasn't just some random guy at work, he had big goals. He loved boasting about how he was in line for a major promotion and how he was the golden boy in the office, the one everyone admired. But his entire image was built on lies. He portrayed himself as the perfect husband, a dedicated father, always putting his family first. At work, this polished image had paid off. He was well liked and respected, but no one knew the truth. No one except me. And that's exactly where I planned to strike his career. His career was his Achilles heel, the thing he treasured the most, and I was determined to tear it apart. But before I dropped the bomb at his job, I needed to set the stage within our social circle. The truth was too massive to reveal all at once, so I had to let it trickle out, planting seeds of doubt before delivering the final blow. I began talking to our mutual friends, casually of course, nothing too direct, just little comments here and there. "Hey, have you noticed Rob's been acting a bit off lately?" Or "I haven't seen much of Jessica around, she's been working late a lot." I wasn't making outright accusations, just subtly suggesting that something might be wrong. People love gossip, especially when they feel like they're in on something secret. I knew once those suspicions were out there, it wouldn't take long for people to start talking. And they did. It didn't take much time before the whispers started coming back to me. People began asking me questions, and I played the concerned husband role perfectly. "Yeah, things have been tough lately. I don't know what's going on with Jessica, but we're working through it," I'd say, keeping my voice low as though I were sharing something private. It was all part of the plan. I wasn't just aiming to ruin Rob's career, I wanted to shatter his relationships with everyone around him, friends, colleagues, even his own family. The more isolated he became, the harder the blow would land. Rob had always been the guy who seemed to have everything together, the one people looked up to. But by the time I was done, no one would trust him anymore. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on Rob's situation at work. The HR department had received my anonymous email, but they hadn't acted on it yet. I knew it would take time for them to investigate, but I wasn't in any rush. I wanted them to dig into Rob's life and see the cracks for themselves. In the meantime, I continued gathering more dirt. I even managed to speak with Rob's wife, which was oddly satisfying. She had no clue, of course. She still believed her husband was the perfect family man. I didn't say much, just asked how things were going with Rob and how their kids were. She gushed about him like he was a saint, telling me how lucky she was to have him. I had to work hard to keep a straight face. Sure, I felt a little guilty at times, especially when I saw how much she adored him. But then I'd remember the photos, the messages, the way he betrayed me without hesitation, and that guilt vanished quickly. As the weeks passed, the tension continued to build. Rob and Jessica were still carrying on like they had nothing to worry about, but the walls were closing in. People began noticing the distance between us, and mutual friends started asking why Rob and I weren't hanging out like we used to. I'd just shrug and say something vague like, people change, I guess, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. They wanted to know more. Soon they'd get the whole story. Finally, after weeks of careful planning, it was time to launch the real takedown. Revenge isn't just about striking back, it's about timing. You have to hit when it will hurt the most, when the impact will ripple through everyone involved. That was the thought behind the event I planned. It wasn't enough for Jessica and Rob to feel my anger in private. They needed to be exposed in front of everyone who mattered to them. It took weeks of preparation. I rented a fancy venue, one of those places people use for corporate events or milestone celebrations. It looked professional, like a grand, innocent occasion. I sent out the invites, making sure to include all the key people, our mutual friends, colleagues, even a few of Rob's higher-ups from work. If I was going to destroy him, it had to be in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to him. I didn't hold back on inviting Jessica's family either. Her parents had always been supportive of us, and I knew this would hit them hard. But they deserved to know what their beloved daughter had been doing. I made sure that everyone connected to our lives was there. No one would escape seeing what was about to happen. In the days leading up to the event, I rehearsed my speech over and over, determined for it to be flawless. It couldn't just be an angry rant. No, it had to be calm and composed, like I was simply stating facts. Facts that no one could argue with. I had the photos, the videos, the text messages, all of it neatly printed, organized, and ready to display on the big screen. I even hired a tech guy to make sure everything ran smoothly when the time came. The night of the event, the atmosphere was buzzing with excitement. People were laughing, drinking, chatting about work and family, just like at any other gathering. Jessica was there, acting the part of the perfect wife, smiling and making small talk, as if everything was normal. And Rob? He was working the room like a pro, shaking hands, laughing, completely unaware that his entire world was about to implode. I watched them both from across the room, keeping my distance, letting them enjoy their final moments of normalcy. It was almost amusing, in a twisted way, to see how confident they were, how sure they were that they'd gotten away with it. They had no idea what was coming. When the time felt right, I walked to the front of the room. The lights dimmed and all eyes turned toward me. I tapped the microphone, cleared my throat, and began. I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight, I started, my voice steady. It means a lot to have all of you friends, family, colleagues gathered here together. I saw Jessica glance at me, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Rob, standing in the back, suddenly looked uneasy. Good. And that's why tonight, I continued, I want to share something with all of you. Something personal, something that's been weighing on me for quite some time. I gestured toward the tech guy in the back, and the screen behind me lit up. The first image appeared: Jessica and Rob holding hands outside a restaurant. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Jessica's face turned pale, and Rob's smile disappeared faster than I'd ever seen. This, I said, pointing at the screen, is my wife and my best friend, caught in the act, sneaking around behind my back, but I didn't stop there. One by one, more photos appeared on the screen: Jessica and Rob together, laughing, kissing, disappearing into hotels. Then the texts came, screenshots of their conversations, filled with flirtation, plans to meet, and even jokes about how clueless I was. The room fell completely silent, except for the hushed whispers of disbelief spreading through the crowd. Jessica tried to speak, stumbling over her words. It's not what it looks like, she mumbled, but her voice was shaky. No one believed her. Rob didn't even try to defend himself. He just stood there, frozen, as the weight of the situation began to hit him. I could see him mentally scrambling, trying to figure out how he'd explain this to his boss, his co-workers, and his family. The silence didn't last long. Soon people began murmuring, then shouting. Friends who had known us for years were livid, asking both Jessica and Rob how they could do something like this. Some turned to me, offering their support. But I didn't need it. This wasn't about pity, this was about justice. Jessica's parents, sitting in the front row, looked like they'd been hit by a truck. Her mother was in tears, and her father just shook his head in disbelief. For a brief moment I almost felt bad for them, almost. The crowd quickly divided. Some gathered around me, offering their condolences, saying things like, "I can't believe they did this to you." Others surrounded Jessica and Rob, demanding answers. It was chaos. Jessica, desperate, tried to approach me, her eyes wide with panic. "Please, let's talk about this." "It's not what you think," she pleaded, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "There's nothing to talk about, Jessica." "You made your choice," I replied coldly. "Now you have to live with it." Rob, on the other hand, remained silent, knowing it was over. His career, his friendships, everything he had built had crumbled in an instant. The people from work, the ones he'd been trying to impress all night, were already whispering amongst themselves, distancing themselves from him. His golden boy reputation was shattered in a single evening. I let them stew in it for a while, watching as the reality of their actions sank in. By the end of the night, Jessica was crying, trying to explain herself to anyone who would listen, but no one cared. Rob had slunk off to a corner, likely wondering how he was going to salvage what was left of his life. As the night wound down, people started leaving, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some told me I'd done the right thing, saying they were proud of me for standing up for myself. But I didn't feel proud, just hollow. At least it was over. The scandal spread like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew about the affair. Jessica and Rob's names were on everyone's lips. At work, Rob's bosses learned of the affair thanks to my well-timed email, and his promotion was swiftly revoked. Rumor had it they were considering firing him outright to avoid bad press. As for Jessica, well, let's just say she lost more than her reputation. The fallout had only just begun. Watching their lives unravel was like witnessing a wildfire destroy everything in its path, leaving only ashes. They lost everything, and honestly, they deserved it. Let's start with Rob. He was always so cocky, so proud of the career he'd built. But the truth caught up with him quickly. After that night, word spread fast. His company heard about the affair, and they couldn't afford the negative attention. The promotion he'd been bragging about for months? Gone. His job, gone. Last I heard, they let him go quietly, not wanting the drama to go public. But the damage was already done. His spotless reputation was in ruins. People at work no longer trusted him, and no one wanted to associate with the man who cheated on his wife with his best friend's spouse. And his family? That perfect family he loved to flaunt fell apart too. His wife found out everything, not just about Jessica, but about the countless lies he'd told her over the years. She took the kids and left him. Word has it she's already filed for divorce. Rob's life, as he knew it, was over all because he couldn't keep his hands off my wife. As for Jessica, her situation wasn't any better. Her family, who had always seen her as some sort of saint, turned their backs on her. Her parents were devastated and ashamed of what she had done. Friends we'd known for years wanted nothing to do with her. She became a social outcast, the woman who betrayed her husband with his best friend. And me. I cut her off completely. She tried to call, text, even showed up at my door once, crying and begging for forgiveness. But I didn't give her the time of day. She had made her decision, and now she had to face the consequences. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a sense of satisfaction watching them both fall apart. Seeing the consequences of their betrayal brought a twisted sense of justice, but that satisfaction didn't last long. Because after all the dust settled, I was still left with the wreckage of my own life. Starting over wasn't easy. The betrayal had cut deep, and for a long time it was hard to trust anyone. I kept to myself, avoiding the people I used to hang out with. I didn't want to be around anyone who reminded me of what had happened. But eventually I realized I couldn't live like that forever. So I started rebuilding slowly, cautiously. I expanded my social circle, meeting new people who didn't know the whole story, who didn't see me as the guy who got betrayed. It took time, but eventually I began to trust again carefully, but it happened, and as much as I hate to admit it, the pain began to fade. It never disappeared completely, but I learned how to live with it. I focused on myself for the first time in years, picking up hobbies I'd long abandoned, traveling, meeting new people. There were still moments when it hurt, when I'd think about the life I thought I had, the trust I once believed existed between Jessica and me, between Rob and me. But every time that pain resurfaced, I reminded myself of how far I'd come. I wasn't the man who had been betrayed anymore, I was the man who had survived it. Looking back, the whole experience changed me. It taught me just how fragile trust can be, how easily people you care about can destroy you without a second thought. But it also taught me something important, something I wish I had known earlier. You can't control other people's actions, you can't make someone love you, and you can't force them to be loyal, no matter how much you give. The only thing you can control is how you respond when everything falls apart. For a long time, I blamed myself. I thought maybe I wasn't good enough, that I should have seen the signs sooner or done something differently. But their betrayal wasn't about me, it was about them, their choices, their selfishness, their inability to be honest. Once I realized that, I was able to let go of the guilt, the anger, and the pain. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you have to value yourself. You have to know your worth and never let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. Because in the end, the only person who will always have your back is you. And that's enough. So here I am, living life on my own terms. I'm not searching for a new relationship right now, and maybe I never will. But I'm okay with that. I've learned to be content with who I am, without needing someone else to complete me. And that, to me, is the greatest revenge of all.